Welcome to the Spiritual Phoenix Podcast. I'm your host, Ross Cessna, and I bring you, the Phoenix Family, a weekly podcast about alchemy, spirituality, magic, mysticism, and more. The Spiritual Phoenix Podcast is fan-funded, and you can contribute with the link in the show notes. Other ways to show your support include subscribing to our YouTube channel, leaving us excellent reviews wherever possible, engaging with our content on social media, shooting me an email, and sending an audio message through the Anchor app. This is a community podcast. I'm just the humble host. Let's start the show. All right, welcome everybody. We are joined by Ben Vonderheide. Ben, how you doing?
Very well.
So one of the preliminary questions I like to ask people before we kind of get into the interview is, what are you grateful for today?
Oh man, I tell you, I've got more to be grateful for than most. So it's a strong, powerful list. I'm grateful today, certainly for my son being here with me working on this mission.
Awesome. Yeah, family is definitely important.
It's a beautiful thing.
It certainly is. It's something I've took for granted at parts of my life, but now it's something I'm beginning to appreciate on a deeper level. So could you explain to the people who you are and what the work is that you are doing?
Yeah, my name is Bennett J. Vonderheide, and tonight I'm here with you in reference to my work with the Nomoli sacred stones unearthed in stone figurines, carved figurines unearthed in West Africa. And on a mission really to as you understand more than most with your podcast, I found something very interesting, intriguing, enigmatic, and surprisingly found that there were very few, almost no one, who knew about it. I had anticipated and just essentially assumed that they were widely known of. And now that I've found that they are not, you kind of take on a responsibility to get the word out of anything you find that is really powerful, cool, and seems to be destined for greater things and to help people.
Absolutely. That sounds like a very worthy cause. How did you come about this, about the Nomoli Stones?
Well, I had a friend of mine who was a diamond guy in West Africa. And when I say diamond guy, similar to, although not the dramatic version, but the real life version of the role that Leonardo DiCaprio played in the movie Blood Diamonds, where this man went into the bush and acquired diamonds and brought them out of the country. He also worked with the United States intelligence community in an active role in West Africa. And at one point in time, years ago, a couple points, there was an attempt to recruit me into getting involved in those activities. I was minimally involved and only in a domestic capacity. But we became good friends. Me and one of the individuals who had approached me was Bill Diamonds. And we became good friends. And over the years, he connected me, and I eventually acquired the stones from him and his connections in the bush.
Okay. So can you explain a little bit about what the Nomoli Stones are?
Yeah, the Nomoli Stones are interesting in that they are very much unknown, as we mentioned, but they're known. They've been documented for quite some time in numerous publications. There's still quite a bit that's unknown and more that we're finding out. So if I just follow it in that order, how we know they're unknown, for the last year plus, my son is 20 years old, and he's very apt in the world of social media and has been doing an outreach in preparation for the book we're writing and the documentary which will follow, and has been putting query out to ask amongst specific groups that would be those interested, whether it be those interested in ancient alien theories, ancient civilization, healing, shamanism, psychic works, stones, of course, are used in many of these areas. And he began to do an outreach, and he asked, can anyone tell us if you know anything about these stones, or if you've ever utilized them in your modality, your healing discipline, if you will. And we were surprised. I mean, we got good results. We have 5,000 friends on Facebook and a lot of people following and commenting on them, on how interesting they were when we posted the various components of the collection and or components of the story, which we've rediscovered, if you will. But not one person had ever heard of or used Nomoli Stones. We took them to the Gem Show up outside of New York City and put them in a booth of a friend of mine, so put a couple out there. And again, thousands of people went by, aficionados and those who are enthusiasts in the area of stones and crystals and healing. And 3 people had heard of them, but only they were African art people, and they'd heard them because of the African art element of the Nomoli Stones. We then took them to MUFON, Mutual UFO Network, anticipating that those people who were foremost in the UFO areas, because I'll tell you shortly how they connect to that ancient alien theories. And we found again, not one person, with the exception of one, Bill Burns. Bill Burns is a gentleman who started this show, UFO Hunters, and started on it years ago. He was the keynote speaker, and I asked him to come look at him. He looked at him, and he said he had never seen or heard of the stones, but he had once heard of Nomoli deities. And so this was amazing to me that no one was aware of them. So they're very much unknown. And again, my son's outreach, according to the numbers they say, members of these groups reached in front of hundreds of thousands, indeed possibly 1 million or more viewers over the last year in very different groups and different type of social media. And so very much unknown. Now they are known though. In fact, they first were known by the outside world in the 1400s. The Portuguese sailors ran across them. And first published in 1854, New York. There was a Thompson in Africa was the book, 1854. There were more writings about them at the turn of the century in the early 1900s. And interesting work by a gentleman in 1917. And then you can go on to Thor Heyerdahl. Are you familiar with Thor Heyerdahl and the Kon-Tiki by chance?
The name sounds familiar, but I can't think of anything off the top of the head. Maybe it's just come up in conversation before. Well,
if you take a minute, and I'll remind your audience may be familiar, but if not, it's certainly worth taking a review of. The Kon-Tiki is the name of the book and documentary and subsequent movie. Thor Heyerdahl was a gentleman who came to the conclusion after visiting indigenous tribes and hearing of their folklore and being educated and knowledgeable in matters related, he determined that he felt that the Peruvians had first sailed and discovered Polynesia and inhabited it. At that time, in 1940s, it was well known throughout the communities and the scholars that the Orientals had settled and first found Polynesia. And they considered it ludicrous to think that the people who lived in Peru who were not that advanced could have possibly done this. So Thor gets this idea that he's going to, well, somebody puts it in his head, says, well, why don't you build a raft and take the trip? So he and a couple other guys, WW2 vets, get on this. They build it exactly as it would have been built 1,500 years before, using cypress logs, and they build a raft. And they man this raft, and they sail off of Peru, and 101 days later, they land in Polynesia, proving more than that Peru settled Polynesia, which was a very big, very large point of pride for Peru, of course. But as he stated, that the ancients saw the highways as a thoroughfare, not as an impedance, as we would like to sometimes perceive that they would have been frightened of. No, they saw it as a way to get from here to there, and they may have been sailing a lot farther than we considered. So Thor Heyerdahl also manned and funded and put together the first ever expedition of Easter Island. And when he did the expedition, he noted in his writings in 1957, I think it was by then, that Easter Island, the Nomoli Stones of West Africa had the closest resemblance to the Easter Island stones, which was found in secret caves. These are smaller stones. Your listeners, I'm sure, are familiar with the large Easter Island stones, which are found throughout the island. There were very many fewer, much more limited collection or supply of very small figurines, which were located in secret caves. And he said that the Nomoli resembled those more than other stones from Africa. And it made a point of other places he'd seen, particularly the ones with the holes in their head, in the top of their head, which were used for ceremonial purposes. So 1957, and so then at the turn of the century again in 1990, in the 1990s, you have a television show called Unexplained Mysteries. Unexplained Mysteries. Unsolved Mysteries, that's right. Unsolved Mysteries. And Unsolved Mysteries was Unsolved Mysteries of Sky Stones. Let me get to that. Unsolved Mysteries was a TV show, and in the 1990s, they did a story on the Sky Stones. The Sky Stones were blue stones found in soil that was dated to 12,000 BC. They were found near Nomoli. And the way they were found was interesting. This Angelo Bertoni was the guy who found them, and he was there talking to the shamans. And he said, hey, he says, you guys say, well, let me back up. This is the time I should probably cover this. According to the natives, Nomoli were gods who lived in heaven, and they misbehaved. As punishment for misbehaving, they were turned to stone, and they, along with the heavens they lived in, were turned to stone and rained down upon the earth, and thereafter lived with the humans, who they helped and blessed when they were here with them. And that's the connection to the ancient alien theory, which we'll get into. So they found these, and the native said to him that this was the legend. And he said, well, if the sky fell down, then certainly you would have the sky here. And they said, oh, yes, the sky fell down, and we know right where it's at. And they took him to where he found the blue stone. The blue stone were filled with iridium. They're often found, well, the iridium, and they also had some items that could not be identified. So anyway, he found the blue stones, and along with that, he found a Nomoli. In that Nomoli, he felt there was a vibration. So he had an X-ray. They found a ball which had a metal ball bearing, which had chromium in it. Even though this was, again, been found in the blue stone area in strata that was identified as 12,000 BC, and chromium had not been used for obviously a long time thereafter. There was a gentleman by the name of Klaus Dorner, Klaus, who was a guy who checked him out and wrote about him. So again, now you're in the 1990s, and there's stories being told about him. There's a couple other quotes in some magazines and some periodicals. But so what I'm saying is that in a very unusual and enigmatic way, somehow they are completely unknown, but they are known. They've been written about. They've been collected. They were collected in the book by Edwin in 1917. He refers to the fact that there were already rumors that they were being manufactured in a foreign country and brought to Africa to be sold as the real relics because they were collected at the time. 1925 and 6, I believe it was, there was a imperialism show, if you will, in Wembley, England, and 50 some odd of the countries of Africa, which were with Britain at the time, had exhibitions, and in the Sierra Leone exhibition, they gave out small 1-inch. What they had little written on the front of it was Nomoli. So very popular. The British royalty has collected them. There are examples of them in the Bronx Museum, in British museums, and other museums around the world, but still remain unknown.
Oh, wow.
What is known about it?
I have a couple questions then. So one of the things that you're saying is there's kind of an awareness of them, but they're on like the peripheral of the consciousness of our culture, where people are aware of them, but very few in number, and not a lot is known about them, which I find compelling. And then secondly, you had mentioned the chromium. Chromium is a man-made thing, correct? It has to be constructed by a process. It's not something that's naturally occurring, correct?
That's my understanding.
Okay. Yeah, that's really compelling.
So they're unknown because they've been suppressed purposefully.
Okay. Do you want to get into that? Like, where do you want to take this next? Because I'm all ears, just kind of digesting what you're saying.
Yeah, the Nomoli Stones have been suppressed for one reason, because they're found buried in the jungle. They're randomly buried, unlike other stones. And to describe them to your audience, they're often made out of soapstone. They're carved. They are figures which are representative of the Nomoli gods, some of them, many of them, and they are said by the natives to have been created by the Nomoli gods and handed down to the natives at the beginning of man. And they are, again, somewhere in the image, and they can see them on ancientalienstones.com as our website, and on there's a video that says Vonderheide collection at the museum. And so we have a video of the professor of African art from Howard University and the museum curator speaking, or the museum, director speaking about these stones and showing them. And you can see a lot of the stones. So again, to describe them for your audience, they are oftentimes anywhere from 5 inches. They can be much larger, but quite often 5 to 10 inches. And they can look like the Nomoli gods themselves. Other times they can be a combination of a Nomoli god infused into a human, often a representative of a chief, because the installment of a chief would often involve using a Nomoli stone and having a ceremony which the purpose of was to instill and skin within the chief the values you would want a chief to have, from bravery to kindness to good luck, good fortune, prosperity, honesty, integrity, the things you would want any leader to have. And then there are some that are more humanoid altogether, that are really just images of humans. But those also oftentimes have a message, a moralistic message. Oftentimes it's a mother with a child, just impressing again the importance of nurturing children, of loving relationship between a family, and that the whole village should recognize the importance of these things. And also they, of course, would have the blessing to protect the mother and the child, or the whole village. They would be for different purposes. Oh, and then I'll get to the last category, if you will, classification. They would be for different purposes: for fertility, for healing, for, again, many different specific and broad purposes. Then the final ones I would say we have very few of, but that we've come across over the years, are the ones which are consistent with ancient alien stones, or stones which inspire ancient alien theorists to review them and come up with ideas of past connections and contacts. And that one of them has the features which are often identified with the insect type of image of an alien visitors. Others are elongated heads, and some reptilian, particularly the reptilian parts. So those are the basic classifications. They were found in these countries. They were dug up, unlike other stones or the parts of the world, not at shrines or altars or temples. not at burial sites, just randomly buried in the jungle. One of the theories being that they are intermediaries between the ancestors, the Nomoli gods, and the living humans when you bury one. Some are not. Some are kept, have always been kept at the center of the village and used for ceremonies for the entire village to benefit.
Wow, that's pretty fascinating because it breaks kind of contemporary understanding of how a lot of ritualistic things are used if they're seemingly placed kind of randomly. Wow, that's kind of a trip to even in itself without all these other compelling aspects to it. I find that really neat. In regards to kind of the draconian or insect looking ones, my question would be this. Although it may be hard to get information, what is your personal feeling of those? Are those more guardian types, or are they more sinister in what they represent? Because to me, like, intuition would say guardian, but I don't have any information about it. So
yeah, I would like to say, I'm a stone whisperer and I get the readings from the stones and can find them all. I am the steward of these stones. And when I hold them and when I utilize them for myself and when I've seen other people utilize them, I've been profoundly impacted, and lives have been profoundly impacted. I can't define each one. And one of the things that me and my son are doing is contacting those who can, those who are psychics, those who are involved with other ways of communicating that will be able to read the stones. And we've already done some, and it's very interesting and just amazing the results we get from handing them to people. So I guess the answer would be that I could say this, is that I've never seen to date, and I would preface this by saying this, it's the instructions I have gotten from the bush are, you do not allow children to hold the stone. You are best not to allow people who are in perhaps unstable and not solid foundation to get involved. But that being said, I've never seen anyone have anything but positive results from the stones. The only thing I could say that is anything that's somewhat at all at first shocks you is I've seen people who hold a stone and they will jolt back into like they just got a shock. And then their eyes will roll up or so, and they'll look like they're, at first at least, not real, in a state of serenity. But at each event when they're done, they felt very positive, which just at first was overwhelming shock to those individuals. So, what I'm saying is you hold them with reverence because they have power. So, it's not anything to willy-nilly around with. People from the country, such as the professor, will maybe only hold one at any particular day. If that answers your question, I can say what some of them were designed for, because in certain cases we have information from the bush, what they were designed, how they were used. Other cases we have information again from the professor because he was born in Ghana, raised in Ghana, and is just a genius and one of the world's foremost experts in these matters. So he can tell us culturally and also from an art perspective what the symbols sometimes mean now translated into current and past West African art, which might be translated into wood and other methods of other substances that they use to do art. But inevitably it could be the same image that was born out of the Nomoli, which has been handed down and was the inspiration.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that definitely answers my question in a sense that there's not enough information, but all the experience have been relatively positive, with the exception of maybe some kind of overwhelming reaction at the beginning to the experience. At this time,
we had a woman come up on a scooter, very nice woman, very sensitive. She's a reader. She reads past lives. And she got about 10 feet away from the one stone with a mother holding a child. And she started to weep. And she said, I just can't take this right now. It's too much. She said, thank you for bringing these stones. This is such a gift. And then she came back an hour later and was able to get closer to it, and said it was just overwhelming, the power of the stone and what it did to her. But, and again, and I guess tears of joy or tears of overwhelming, but not in a bad way, because she came back and was able to then slowly approach the stone. She never did touch it. She didn't feel she needed to do that, but just was very, very profoundly, again, impacted by it. So at the same show, Steve Baxter came by with his two healers that he was with, and he seemed lethargic and not alert fully. And almost as they were leading him, and they asked if they could hold the twin stone, and I said certainly. And they sat in the back behind the table next to our booth, and he sat down, and all of a sudden you could just feel something. It was very interesting, and they just seemed, that area just seemed to light up. Light's flickering over here right now. But anyways, that area just seemed to light up, and he had what he defined as an experience, what he defined as a healing. And I can say for sure that when he came back, he seemed to be just awake and alert, and his eyes bright, and very interesting and powerful. So we're just kind of wandering around, figuring it out as we go.
Yeah, understandable. That's sometimes what you have to do, especially with something like that, I would imagine. At this time, we're going to take a quick break, and then we'll come back with the second half of the show. Ben, thanks so much for the first half. I'm looking forward to seeing what is uncovered in the next half. Are you facing questions with no answers, or seeking an escape from persistent problems? Then enlist the Oracle at Mushin. The Oracle at Mushin provides high-quality tarot and life coaching services at affordable prices. Quickly and easily book online with the link in our description. Our listeners get a 10% discount off the Oracle at Mushin's already low prices. Use code OFF10. That's OFF10. Seek the solution today. All right, welcome everybody. We are back for round 2 with Ben Vonderheide and the Nomoli Stones. So Ben, the floor is yours, man. Let's see what you want to get into next.
So we were talking about the stones. I guess it's worth mentioning that the reason why they're suppressed. How can they be so unknown? And the answer to that is pretty much every way they could be suppressed. You start off with the fact that, as the professor would say, they were buried in the ground. So unknown, nothing written about them. First uncovered again by the Portuguese in the 1400s. But mostly it would be the religious end of the equation, in that the West Africa is strongly Muslimized, radical Muslims in many cases, and often radical Christians, missionaries will be in the area. These individuals religiously will destroy stones like this, and are radically interested in destroying any beliefs that the natives might have of their traditions, and any practices which could still be actively continued at this point in time. Socially, politically in these countries, there's not really a separation between church and state. If you want to be successful in politics and or business, it's likely best that you at least be a Muslim. As some people I've met, a Muslim at least when you're in West Africa. When you come to America, you might not have to be a Muslim anymore. You can drink and do what you want. But when you're there, it's very wise to be a Muslim. And so, again, they'll destroy them. You got that. The other thing which is unique in this area, which I like to relate it to the Native Americans to show the contrast. The Native American artifacts now are very revered by many people. There are those who use them, study them, they trade in them, they are sold for high values, and they are sought after. If you find an old ancient Native American stone carving, you've found a relic that's highly desirable, well recognized. But in Africa, the culture is different. There's a huge desire to not be viewed as uncivilized and primitive. And there is a lack of recognition of the value of the traditional religious beliefs because they are viewed as primitive and uncivilized. So while here again, you have those like myself who go to powwows for many years, more people go as time proceeds. In Africa, even the current people in power are very much opposed to being viewed as connected to things like these stones. In fact, when in working on collaboration with the book with the professor, Kwakua Foyanza, he had me do an outreach to various college and university professors in the African departments and often African studies professors. And unfortunately, none of them are interested in getting involved in collaborating and researching and providing knowledge or even knowing about these stones, which is unfortunate. But that's a key factor in why they have been suppressed around the world. The next thing I think I want to talk about is the Dogon connection. This is very interesting. Myself and my son have been researching any number of things, as we've told you, some of the literature we've identified, publications, etc. But I did after the MUFON show, even though no one had ever heard of him, there was one gentleman, Reality Radio? Nature of Reality Radio, Andrew Fisher, his name, nice guy. And he stopped by and he said, "Hey, would you do a podcast?" And I said, "Well, I'm 60 years old almost. What's a podcast?" And he said, "Well, you just sit home and I talk to you on the phone." And I said, "Sure." So I did the podcast, and in the podcast, there were people online commenting, and one of them commented because Andrew asked me about the Dogon. And I told him I'm familiar somewhat with the Dogon, but I'm not an expert in Dogon. And he said, "Do you know the connection is, the Nomoli?" And I said, "There's never, that I know of, been any connection between the Nomoli and the Dogon." And someone posted that the Dogon were visited by the Nomos, fish-like gods, who imparted the wisdom of the Sirius B. Your viewers are probably familiar with the Dogon. You're familiar with the Dogon?
Yeah, I've heard of them, definitely. I researched that thread at one point in my life.
Yes, and the key ingredient with them, or the key feature is that they identified Sirius B long before science did. Mm-hmm. And they have drawings of it, and they believe that this is where mankind came from. And so this podcast commenter said that the Dogon were visited by the Nomos, and we looked into it. We said, well, fish-like beings, not really. Normally are not fish-like beings. But then we looked it up, and actually the more correct definition would be amphibious beings. And then it occurred to me that I remember from the bush hearing that why the crocodiles are revered is they are connected to the Nomoli, that we have stones, such as one we have where the crocodile is infused up the back of the figure, the Nomoli figure, and where the head of the crocodile looks like a hat or a mohawk. Mm-hmm. And so I had heard from the bush that they revered the crocodile because it could live on the land and in the water. Amphibious, same definition. Then my son looked it up, and we identified that these come from Sierra Leone, Liberia, and Guinea only, these Nomoli. And that borders on Mali, where the Dogon come from. And we looked into the Mali Empire, which was back in the 1300s AD. And we noticed that at that point in time, the Mali Empire actually entered into Guinea and into Sierra Leone and touched upon Liberia. And we came to think, well, if they would be the Nomos of Mali, then it would stand to reason over time that could be shortened to Nomoli. Mm. And so we rediscovered. Now, upon further research, we found that in 1950, Jean-Paul Leboeuf and Mason Tribe, excuse me if I got that right, in À la Civilisation de Chad in 1950, they wrote, Nomoli have apparently been found in the Dogon area of Mali, 600 miles away. So, and then in 2008, in the Toronto magazine, Ufological Center, says, note the resemblance between the term Nomolo with the name Nomo. So there were others who have at least considered that connection. That then, of course, led us to the connection with ancient Egypt, because the Dogon have been genealogically connected to ancient Egypt. Dogon civilization said to be 3200 BC is the date, and the ancient Egyptian civilization dates to 3100 BC. And this led us into well, I wasn't aware there was such an argument, into the argument which now the Nomoli are playing a part in, is, were there ancient civilizations? Well, let me put it this way. There are some, including scholars and many in other parts of Africa, who do not believe that the first pyramids ever built were of that size and were built in Egypt. That prior to that, there were civilizations which rose and fell, which had developed the technology and the building capacity, and they built perhaps smaller pyramids at first, because that would make sense. And that they had actually migrated to Egypt. This is the long-standing belief of those in West Africa. When I speak to those deep in the bush, they would tell me that they have been there 10,000 years. Some would say they've been there 30,000 years. So their beliefs are consistent with that theory. Of course, there are those who would argue that the Egyptians were of Mediterranean origin. So this, again, lends itself to that, or at least brings about further conversation as to the origins of not only the ancient Egyptian civilization, but potentially the earliest civilizations, because there are those who believe that 15,000. Of course, now I've run into those who believe that it was 100,000+ years ago that mankind started, and that it could have potentially been in that area. There are those who believe that the Atlantis continent could have been right off of West Africa. And there's a body of thought that around 13 to 15,000 years ago, there was activity in that area. So again, I can't say. All we're doing is investigating, finding those who are the experts, and finding more about how the Nomoli fit in all of these places.
Yeah, that's a really interesting approach. Just to sum up the theory that you had said, not that you're necessarily supporting it or anything, it's just information you're conveying, is that some people believe that potentially these Dogon deities descended, the Dogon and the Nomoli were somewhat involved potentially, and then they migrated to Egypt, started that civilization, and kind of everything spread out from there. Correct?
Yes. That the Nomos, which were the Dogon gods, are the same origin as the Nomoli, which are the gods of these stones and the gods of West African countries of Sierra Leone. And again, and if you follow to the next level, the creator of Nomos was Amma, Amma. And in Egyptian deities, the god, the king of all gods, is Ammon, Ammon. What's really interesting is if you look them both up, you'll find the slang for both of them is Amen. So this is where there's a potential connection linguistically.
Yeah, when you start to really look at the etymology of certain words, some of that stuff becomes harder and harder to dispute in some ways, unless it's a very convenient coincidence. But then looking at how it all kind of ties together with all these other, all the other evidence, it stands for a lot more suitable case. If I'm not mistaken, in like criminal cases, there's an amount of evidence where it becomes almost indisputable based upon how many different connections there are. And there's a lot of evidence that kind of would tie that together. Maybe it is convenient coincidences, but it's at the very least, it's incredibly intriguing to consider.
Yes, and certainly those areas have not been penetrated by the means that would have identified if there are pyramids long buried in the jungle.
Yeah, something about the jungle too to consider with all of that is the fact that all of the decay there would bury stuff at a quicker rate than maybe other areas. So it could very likely be under soil, or potentially even the climate there could cause erosion on a different scale than maybe other areas. And it would stand to reason that people didn't go from these massive pyramids out of nothing, that there would be kind of quite literally steps of building them to get the procedure underway prior to building these massive ones. And if I'm not mistaken, there is some evidence around that in Egypt, but it would stand to reason that there might be other examples of that elsewhere also. Yeah, that's really
this compelling. Is part of the prejudice of the dark continent, the theory that there are those, and I just had this conversation with the director of the museum, Doris Lagon, very nice woman, where she's had conversation with Egyptians who feel that Egypt isn't part of Africa. And so there's this whole contention that the rest of Africa is dark, was never civilized. And of course, you've got your Michael Tellingers and others who believe, again, that 100,000 years ago, there were civilizations there. But that is the myth we've been fed, I think, for a long time, since Yul Brynner was the pharaoh. And so that's hard to break, that Egypt is a part of Africa, and it's most likely that they would have been connected in some way to the ancient, and genealogically they're beginning to again prove these things.
One thing that kind of probably compounds the issue with trying to understand this, and this is something that I've heard, I don't know the validity of it, that Egyptian Historical Society kind of refutes a lot of claims that don't follow their narrative. And that's not unique to them, that's unique to a lot of areas of history. But I could see how that might make getting more information difficult. And then when you couple it with them wanting to tell this narrative of not being part of Africa, so on and so forth, that further muddies the waters of getting clarity on that.
Yeah, there might be at least some Egyptians that have a sense that they were the first, is what I understand, and that's important to them. And if there's anyone who's challenged that, it could be of concern to them. There was Anta Diop wrote a book, which was an interesting book. One of the professors recently connected me to, and other books which have done a lot of research and have, in their opinion, identified that the Egyptians and the ancient African from South Chad and just over West Africa, again towards the Dogon, were connected. But that's for greater minds and mind to think. I think the key that this is interesting is that one of the most interesting things is that there are mysteries like this still available to be uncovered. And you don't have to be a scholar. You don't have to be a scientist. You know, me and my son, Chu, are just a couple of guys who got interested in anything. And it says, Doris would say, if you look at art and just observe it, it's art. As soon as you ask a question about it, it's education.
Mm.
And so the process of learning and finding out about these things is something, again, that anyone can do. Any of your listeners not only could find some revelation that has been unknown, but they may actually have Nomoli somewhere in their collection and not even know it. They could have in a local flea market run across them, or some other. If this could still exist, and was, we think that information is ubiquitous, I thought, with the internet. And again, there's, from that stone show, there was such an enthusiasm about stones and healing and using them for alternative medicines and other applications, that something like this could exist. It would be so unique and just fun to check out, and not be known could mean there are many other things just like this your listeners could uncover in their path.
That's a very inspiring thing to say. And I know for me, and I'm sure that you've encountered this on your own journey with these stones in particular, the more you begin to explore stuff, the more threads that you pull, the more threads that there become to pull at, and the more that this leads you on this epic quest. Like, this is part of my quest, is actually doing this show, and now it's led me to talking to you about this, which can lead me down 1,000 different avenues depending upon what choice I make. So that's a really interesting outlook, and it's important to remember there's still mysteries out there. We don't know everything under the sun. Some things are forgotten. Some things are outside of the peripheral of our consciousness, and it's important to be mindful and present so we can gain insight from that. Real quick, you had mentioned your website. I'd like you to mention it again so people can see some of these stones, get some more information, and check out what you're doing.
Yeah, ancientalienstones.com. And on there you can see some of the stones. We've made some of the stones from the collection are available. And we're going to put them into the hands of people so that they can activate them. And the individuals who have acquired them so far have had profound results. I like to talk about my friend Jeff the shaman down in Bradenton, Florida, in the village. There's a little area of the city that they turned into a village for arts and healing. And Jeff the Village Mystic is his name of his little place there. Really nice, great place, really good energy. And he acquired a stone. One of the ones of this set here, there were a couple of them, I'll show it to you. Very undefined, very interesting and ancient looking. And he put it at first with his crystal skulls, which were very valuable, and other stones he had. But he said it told him it wanted to be involved in healings. So he took it off the shrine and began to use it in his healings, and used it in many healings. And that's, I think, what's important, is that the stones, we did exhibit them for a couple of years at the museum. Once we found out how rare the collection was and how unknown they were, we wanted to put them on exhibit one time so anyone who wanted to could see them. And then it's our decision to break them up and put them into people's hands instead of just to be looked at. They are stones that are designed to be used. So we have some stones available there. There's also, as I said, a video of the museum exhibit, which those of you many people are not in a position to acquire one, but you can look at them and check them out. We did a nice little segment where we put all the stones one after another in there and see if it can be inspirational, or I just think they're very interesting, and it's an adventure to find new things like this. So if for no other reason that you've seen something that you haven't seen 1,000 times on TV, I am confident that you are bringing this, and for whatever reason, you're the one who has seen this and is bringing it to your viewers for the first time. And so it's exciting to be part of that happening. And I think it's exciting. They're fortunate that you're a guy who is brave enough to look at new things.
Oh, thank you. It's an honor to actually just have this conversation with you and get the opportunity to hear something new. And just to maintain an open mind is something I'm grateful for, because I had a closed mind for a very long time, even though I thought it was open. I'm going to put a link to your website in the show notes too, so people can find it super easy. They can get to it directly. My next question for you is going to be, you had mentioned that you were working on a book with somebody. Do you have any kind of understanding when that might be coming out?
I can't say for sure. We're working with Professor Kakufo. He was the art professor at Howard University in Washington, D.C. for 37 years. He's retired now, and a published author. The first book is going to capitalize and utilize the images of the stones to draw people in and to really get the image to have the greatest impact. So people really want to see them, and that's the most powerful thing. Words are nice, what they mean, all that, but the image of the stone is where it's at. So unlike most books that you would see that you would normally want to write a defined book compendium of all the facts you could find about Nomoli and have that be the first real book about him. But we're going to take a different approach and go with this coffee table, large book with the pictures. And then it'll also have some, depending on what's available, a description from the bush of what the stone represents, a description from the art profession. And then if it has been read by a stone reader, a psychic, or a healer, if it's been used by a healer or psychic, maybe testimonials. And so that will be the first book. The second is going to be more involved with the going back into the bush and getting further details, and also our research that we're going to be continuing in different areas. In fact, we are at this time, so by the time you come out, it's not going to be anything we have to keep under wraps. At this time, we are in the process of attempting to acquire footage. The first footage that, as far as I know, in existence, now there may be some somewhere in a library in England or something, I don't know, of the use of the existence and location and use of Nomoli in the current bush, which again is sensitive because they are not politically correct on the way to get there. Until you get deep into the bush is where they would still be actively utilizing them.
Yeah, they're kind of culturally taboo, as you had mentioned. So there's kind of the stigma around even probably going through that, which will be an adventure of itself to kind of keep it on the hush as you go about making your way there, I imagine.
Even more than that, I know that in about a year and a half ago or so, there was a woman who was a trader in the Nomoli, and her home caught fire with a lot of Nomoli, and she was killed in the fire. And so it's hard to say. There wasn't that much wood in the house. So it's hard to say. It looked like it had been burned out quickly and powerfully. So it's hard to say, but there are very serious people who have religious beliefs, and unfortunately that, I think you've probably experienced this, they seem to be categorized into two categories. One, people who find God and learn that he wants them to help and love others, and some people who think God wants them to go around and smash other people's relics because they're different, and smash other people because they're different, and put the fear of God or Allah, whichever the case may be, into those who might not see things their way. It's unfortunate, but yes, it's it would certainly be surreptitious and clandestine.
Yeah, I definitely don't blame you for that, especially with that whole anecdote of that woman, because that's a good thing to point out. People can be very forceful with imposing their belief structures on other people, and historically that's caused most of the problems in our world is that kind of exact behavior. Yeah, I just really want to thank you for taking the time to come on. I don't know if you have anything else that you want to mention in closing, or...
I just want to thank you. You're obviously, as I was saying before we opened up, sometimes I wonder if we choose the stones or the stones choose us, Ross.
Yeah, I'm grateful that they chose our paths to cross and us to have this conversation, Ben. I'd like to ask the guest to kind of take us out with a couple closing words. So the floor is yours, and you can end the show. Thank you again.
Hey, I'm just grateful, and I think everyone out there is too, that you're open mind, because I'm a firm believer that, as I say, when God decides how he wants to use, what tools he wants to use and how he wants to help people, he doesn't ask me. So I keep my mind open, and I look forward to opportunities. And when I find things like this stones, and I see a power of good that is destined to be used, that has been suppressed, and can be part of bringing that to light with people like you on your show here tonight, I just feel more blessed and compelled to continue, and not quite sure how I ended up being so lucky to be involved with this, but again, grateful for all your viewers to listen in and let your friends know that you found something new and different and cool and interesting, enigmatic. I mean, just really nice, something nice that we found. It's the world can use more nice things, tools to help.
Thanks for listening to the show, Phoenix family. Just a reminder, we are fan-funded and you can contribute with the link in the show notes. Other ways to support the show include leaving excellent reviews wherever possible, subscribing to our YouTube channel, engaging with our content on social media, sending me an email, or reaching out via voice message through the Anchor app. Your support is greatly appreciated. Much love and synchronicity. Peace.